Arundhati Roy is a traitor. She is an enemy of the state and a dangerous threat to society. That's not my opinion, but rather the official charge that is levied against Roy by the government of India. But how did this famous author get to this point? And why isn't she bothered by it? Roy was born in Kerala, India, and her first foray into writing was as a screenwriter, writing and co-starring in the film titled In Which Annie Gives It to Those Ones, among others. This was also Roy's first experience with name recognition. She would go on to write perhaps her most famous book, God of Small Things, in 1997, which ventured into the forbidden topics of a holiday family dinner: politics, religion, race, and class. One of Roy's first tastes of controversy soon began with her support of the Naxalite effort to prevent the building of dams that would further eradicate indigenous peoples in the area. Naxalites were a vigilante group with Maoist leanings, and although some charges drummed up against her by the Indian government were later dropped, the court didn't like the disrespectful tone of her defense, and she spent one day in jail. Her next bit of criticism came after her support of a well-known vigilante, Phulan Devi, arguing in a series of newspaper columns that the film about this caste-breaking woman's life showed an unflattering condemnation of the activist. The backlash against Roy for her opinions was swift and harsh. She would write, quote, "Pity the nation that has to silence its writers for speaking their minds," end quote. Nevertheless, Roy would continue writing books and continue finding trouble, offending right-wing ideologues and the Indian government in her spare time. Here, it's important to note a distinction between two words, ethics and morals, as Arundhati Roy personifies the difference. Ethics are an official list of rules of an organization, group, or government, while morals are what you believe to be right and wrong. What Roy has done throughout her life is considered unethical by some, but one can see that her morals are exemplary. And yet, harsh criticism of the author has been consistent and strong. She notes that even a few people whom she considered allies would tell her to stop pushing the boundaries and appearing caustic. Some really bad advice for an activist. One can often judge someone's qualities based on the negative things said about them, and Roy's have been that she is too opinionated, paints with too broad of a brush, and takes on too many causes, none of which the author plans on stopping anytime soon. On her side, Roy has won the 2002 Land and Cultural Freedom Award, the 2004 Sydney Peace Prize, and the 2007 Sahitya Academy Award from the Indian Academy of Letters, all as a result of her unethical behaviors. Roy writes, quote, "To call someone like me a writer-activist suggests that it's not the job of a writer to write about the society in which they live, but it used to be our job," end quote. Roy's next accusation and charge would be quite serious, the biggest of her life, and would last for almost 14 years and counting to this day. In 2010, Roy spoke out fervently in favor of Kashmiri independence, a suggestion that ruffled the peacock feathers of the Indian government, all the way to the top and Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. Roy's right-wing accuser said that the activist, quote, "jeopardized public peace and security," end quote, by suggesting Kashmiris should be free and independent. She was brought up on charges of sedition, which can come with grim consequences, especially in a country that is ranked 161st of 180 countries on the freedom scale compiled by the respected group Journalists Without Borders. India's ranking has dropped 11 places just since Modi took office in 2014. Despite a biased system, however, the Indian Supreme Court later intervened in Roy's frivolous prosecution, putting a stay on the charges in 2012. But the author was found guilty of contempt of court in 2019 for writing in support of a Maoist-leaning activist also calling for Kashmiri independence. In Roy's next book, the author set out to distance herself from the charges of sedition, just trying to lay low and hope people forgot that they even heard the word sedition associated with her name. Also, that isn't true. Roy's next book was, in fact, titled My Seditious Heart, doubling down on the charge and sticking it to the Indian government. Yet her biggest court battle is far from over. In 2023, the charges of sedition were reinstated and the author faces a mountain of legal trouble in 2024. Roy's long incarceration is not off the table for the Indian government in their ongoing pursuit to destroy one of their biggest opponents. Recently, Naomi Klein, a fellow author and supporter of Roy's, tweeted a bold warning. Quote, "Message to Narendra Modi. Hands off Arundhati Roy. You have no idea what you will unleash if you pursue this political prosecution aimed at silencing your most eloquent critic. She is a hero to millions, and we see you." End quote. I encourage you to think about Arundhati Roy, not necessarily in terms of specific politics and opinions, but rather her bottomless well of drive and fight to try and right what she sees wrong with the world. How does this fit into your own moral principles? As for Roy, her vision of the future is surprisingly optimistic. Quote, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. I can hear her breathing." End quote.